In 1125, the Holy Roman Emperor, ruler of a vast swath of Europe stretching all the way from the Mediterranean to the Baltic and North Seas, died heirless. In the confusion that followed, 7 of the empire's most powerful lords took the privilege of electing the next ruler. Those holding this right to vote became known as Prince Electors, and the title would be carried on to their successors for hundreds of years. In total, only 3 more princes would be elevated to this rank before the empire was dissolved in the early 19th century, and the first of them was Duke Maximilian of Bavaria. He became Elector in 1623, but even then, he only managed to gain the title by taking it from one of the original 7. The Duchy of Bavaria was one of the largest states of the Holy Roman Empire, and had by the time of Maximilian already existed in one form or another for 1,000 years. For a bit less than half of that time, it had been ruled by his family, the House of Wittelsbach, and since the early 16th century, they had governed it from the city of Munich. It was there that Maximilian was born in 1573 as the eldest son of Duke William V to survive infancy. Being a fervent Catholic and a strong supporter of the Counter-Reformation, his father had him educated at the Jesuit-dominated University of Ingolstadt. There, Maximilian studied law, gained military training, and in addition to the languages of Latin, Greek, and Czech, which he had learned as a child, he was now also taught Italian and French. By attending meetings of the local city council, he also managed to gain some early political experience. In 1594, at the age of 20, he departed for his grand tour of Europe. Traveling first to the court of the emperor in Prague, he later visited a number of smaller Italian states before arriving at the court of the Pope in Rome. The next year he was supposed to go to Paris, but due to the ongoing Huguenot wars between Catholics and Protestants, this visit had to be cancelled. Instead he went to Lorraine, an imperial duchy bordering France, and there married a daughter of its duke called Elizabeth. Although their marriage would remain a childless one, the two seemed to have gotten along well and shared a very deep religiosity. Upon his return to Bavaria, Maximilian was gradually transferred power from his father. Having spent a fortune building new churches and funding missionary work as far away as Asia and the Americas, William V was struggling to keep the duchy's finances in check. In 1597, he finally decided to abdicate in favor of his more energetic and capable son, and retired to spend the remaining 30 years of his life in monastic seclusion. Not long after coming to power, Maximilian succeeded in putting the duchy on firmer financial footing. The extravagant spending of his father was put to an end, and the state's income was increased through things like a new beer monopoly, salt production, customs duties, and the promotion of trade and commerce. Apart from overhauling the economy, he also revised the law code, built an effective army, and tightened control over his lands and the church. These reforms would pave the way for the absolutist rule which would characterize Bavaria in the following centuries, and crucially they gave Maximilian room for an active foreign policy. In the beginning of the 1600s, tensions were high between Catholics and Protestants. The Duke had in 1601 initiated a dialogue between representatives of both parties aimed at discussing whether the Bible was the only legitimate source to solve religious disputes or whether other authorities such as the Pope could be used. However, the arguments of the two sides soon deteriorated into mere name-calling and insults, and the failure of the meeting anticipated a looming conflict. Although Maximilian had initially refrained from interfering in German politics, in 1607 he was entrusted with the duty of executing an imperial ban against the free city of Donauwörth, a Protestant stronghold. In December that year, his troops occupied the city, and vigorous steps were taken to restore the supremacy of Catholicism. When, on top of this, an attempt was made the following year to restitute all secularized monastic land in the empire, a number of Calvinist and Lutheran princes came together to create the Protestant Union, an alliance of mutual protection in the case of war. As a response, Maximilian then organized the Catholic League in 1609, also meant as a defensive alliance. A decade later, it was time to elect a new emperor. The choice fell upon the Habsburg Ferdinand II, who was also Archduke of Austria as well as King of Hungary, Croatia and Bohemia. The very same year as his election, however, Ferdinand's Bohemian subjects revolted and chose the Calvinist Elector Frederick V of the Palatinate as their new king. To quash this uprising, he convinced Maximilian to put the army of the Catholic League at his disposal. However, the Bavarian Duke exacted a high price for this. According to their agreement, the League would retain all lands conquered from the rebels. The cost of the war would be repaid by the Emperor, and Maximilian would gain not only the region of Upper Palatinate from Frederick V, but also his title of Elector. After concluding a treaty of neutrality with the forces of the Protestant Union, thereby safeguarding his flank, the League's general, Count Tilly, marched into Bohemia the following year and destroyed Frederick's forces at the Battle of White Mountain. Soon, the Palatinate was also overrun by Tilly's troops, and just as promised, the Emperor transferred the title of Elector to Maximilian in 1623. But although he had thus emerged victorious in Bohemia, this would merely mark the start of a far larger conflict, the 30 Years' War. The decision to transfer the title of Elector was met with widespread outrage, and soon a coalition of Protestant rulers, led by King Christian IV of Denmark, prepared to invade Germany in defense of Frederick's rights. This endeavor turned out to be unsuccessful, however, and eventually Maximilian's forces occupied all of northern Germany and most of Denmark. The latter parts of the war would prove less favorable to him. In 1630, the Swedes entered the conflict, and led by their king, Gustavus Adolphus, they defeated and killed Count Tilly in battle, and in 1632 managed to occupy most of Bavaria. Maximilian was thus forced to flee Munich, and although he would regain control a few years later, the entry of France into the war on the Swedish side would leave Bavaria in constant peril. In May of 1648, Maximilian's army finally met a decisive defeat, forcing him to flee once again. Luckily though, the Peace of Westphalia was signed soon afterwards, finally putting an end to hostilities. As the smoke cleared on the battlefields of Europe, Maximilian found himself ruling a land devastated by decades of war and plundering, but also one that was larger than when the conflict began. The peace treaty had allowed him to retain the region of Upper Palatinate, restoring only the Rhenish lands to Frederick V's successor. Furthermore, Maximilian was allowed to keep the title of Elector, and although the electorate of the Palatinate was restored, it was now ranked as the 8th, below that of Bavaria. The latter part of his reign would be spent rebuilding the electorate and ridding it of its war debts. Luckily, Maximilian proved just as capable of economizing now as during his youth, and is quoted as saying that true reputation and greatness depend not on spending, but on spending well and on saving, so that little will make a lot, and from a few hundred will come a few thousand, and from the thousands will come millions. When he wasn't saving or investing his money, however, one of the things that Maximilian liked to spend it on was his collection of paintings. He is known to have acquired numerous works by Albrecht Dürer, one of the most famous artists of the German Renaissance, who a century earlier had been active in the nearby free city of Nuremberg. He also acquired a number of works by the Flemish artist Peter Paul Rubens, and even commissioned 4 hand paintings from him. In terms of a built legacy, Maximilian is responsible for extending the old Munich residence from where he ruled, adding a new wing in the late Renaissance style. He also extended the old palace at Schlesheim in the suburbs of Munich, and in the city itself he built the Italian-style Hofgarten. As Maximilian grew older, he dedicated himself more and more to religion, and when he passed away in 1651, it was while on pilgrimage in the city of Ingolstadt. Reaching the age of 78, he had lived to become 1 year older than his father, and despite having spent several decades of his reign at war, he left the duchy's finances in good shape. After the death of his first wife, Elizabeth, he had married Maria Anna, a daughter of the emperor, and with her he had 2 sons. The eldest of them, Ferdinand Maria, became the second Elector of Bavaria.